Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
I know this has not been easy, but I want you to know that you are protected.
Among the first words the public has heard from Margaret Allen through her tears is that she's sorry for the murder of Wenda Wright. Allen said she shouldn't be put to death for something she didn't do.
Did you feel sorry when you said, "Thank God that's over"?
No, that's not true. I didn't do that. I didn't say that.
Your daughter talked about what you'd asked her to do. Go get some tape.
I wasn't never no killer, no murderer. I was always a loving, caring person.
Margaret Allen was born on January 23, 1966. In her late 30s, Margaret was living in an apartment with her roommate, James Martin, and her children. She had a housekeeper by the name of Wenda Wright, and Wenda lived in a house nearby with her boyfriend, Johnny Dublin. On February 8, 2005, Margaret noticed that her purse was missing. She left the house and asked Quentin to look after her children. Quentin was a young 19-year-old who happened to have the same last name as Margaret, but they were not related. Margaret considered Quentin to be like a nephew because she took him off the streets and cared for him. Margaret went to Wenda's house and was invited inside. She whispered something into Wenda's ear, and after the quiet exchange, Wenda left with Margaret. Johnny was inside of the house and witnessed everything that happened and saw his girlfriend Wenda leaving the house. Unfortunately, it would be the last time he would see Wenda alive. While back at her house, Margaret asked Quentin to help her look for her purse inside of the house. They were unable to find it, and she told Quentin that the only person who could have been the culprit was Wenda because she was the only person in the house before the purse went missing. Some time had passed and Margaret returned to Wenda's house. Before heading off to Wenda's house, though, she made Wenda stay at her house and told Quentin to keep her inside and not to let her leave no matter what. Wenda did try leaving once, but after Quentin told her that Margaret wanted her to stay, she agreed to stay put. Back at Wenda's house, Margaret spoke with Johnny and told him that Wenda stole about $2,000 from her and asked Johnny if he would be willing to allow her to look around the house for the money. Johnny was okay with her request, even though he thought it was odd that Margaret had scratches on her that weren't there the first time she came to his house that day. Margaret began searching the house, and Johnny asked where Wenda was. Margaret responded by saying that Wenda was at her house. Margaret's search resulted in nothing, and she went back home. Now back in the comfort of her own home, Margaret still did not allow Wenda to leave. She decided to let James braid her hair, which took some time, and Wenda began crying, asking to go home. Wenda's cries were ignored, and Wenda attempted to walk out of the house but was hit by Margaret. Quentin would later go on record and say that Margaret had a gun and threatened him by telling him that if he did not help her with Wenda, she would shoot him. Quentin agreed to assist Margaret by holding Wenda down, and while doing so, Margaret felt the need to pour whatever she could find on Wenda. She collected rubbing alcohol, hairspray, fingernail polish remover, and bleach. The noise was too much and abnormal, so one of Margaret's kids walked into the living room to see what was going on. Instead of telling them to go back into their room, she asked them for a piece of duct tape. Margaret then attempted to use the duct tape, but Wenda was wet from everything that was poured on her, so she settled for a belt. While being hurt and not fighting back, Wenda cried out, "Please stop, please stop. I'm going to piss myself." After a few minutes, Wenda was dead, and Margaret instructed Quentin to get some sheets to tie her hands in case she woke up. Wenda never woke up, but Quentin ended up leaving Margaret's house, and she continued to call him throughout the night, but he would not answer. The very next day, Margaret went to Wenda's house again and was greeted by Johnny. She asked him where Wenda was, but of course he had no clue. Margaret then went out into the community, and she found Quentin at a barber shop. Quentin noticed that Margaret still had a gun on her, so he left with her, got in her truck, and noticed that her roommate James was inside as well. Margaret then told Quentin that Wenda was dead and he needed to help her get rid of the body. The trio drove to a Lowe's store to purchase plywood so it would be easy to transfer Wenda from the house to the truck. They then drove to another shop in order to rent a dolly truck. After that stop, they drove back to Margaret's house where Quentin noticed that Wenda was now wrapped in a carpet. All three of them took part in transporting Wenda's body to the truck, and all three were equipped with shovels that they got from Margaret's mother's house. They drove to an area off the highway where they dumped Wenda's body and began digging a hole. Once they dug a hole that was big enough, they unwrapped Wenda from the carpet and placed her body inside of the hole. They kept a carpet so that they could throw it in a dumpster that was outside of the truck shop. Once they were done, they acted like nothing had happened and picked up one of Margaret's daughters up from school. Quentin, although close to Margaret and helping her with any request, could not take what had happened and ended up going to the police station to turn himself in later that day. Margaret was arrested 3 days later on February 11th. Margaret, James, and Quentin were all questioned. Quentin admitted everything. James said that he was not present when Linda died because he was outside working on Margaret's car. He said that he left at around 10 o'clock p.m. to get a starter belt for the car, and when he returned, he asked Margaret if she had any cocaine, and she replied by saying no. Because she was out of what he needed, James said that he left to go get cocaine and came back to the house and was high and unaware of anything that was going on inside of the house. He told detectives that he never saw Wenda or Quentin inside of the house. He stated that the next day he drove with Margaret in her car while she picked up her children from school, and she randomly told him that she needed help with something. He pinned every idea on Margaret and admitted that he followed all of her demands, which included cleaning out the truck and items inside of her house. When trial began, a crime scene technician testified that she exhumed Wenda's body and found a cigarette butt nearby. DNA was taken from that cigarette, and the DNA matched to James Martin. A neurological physician by the name of Michael Gebel testified on behalf of Margaret for the defense and confirmed that Margaret suffered from numerous head injuries, and between 1995 and 1996, she was treated for facial trauma, head trauma, and bite wounds. Margaret had also suffered from an overdose, and Dr. Gebel stated that she had significant intracranial injuries that lowered her intellectual capacity and brain damage that destroyed her impulse control. In a quote from a court document, Dr. Gebel said that her brain damage might affect her ability to appreciate the criminality of her conduct and that she would have difficulty conforming her conduct to the requirements of law. She would not be able to create a complex plan, and she lost the ability to control her mood, which is actually a reason why he could not determine whether or not she was substantially mentally impaired. She was just not cooperative, even with knowing that he was there to help her. Another doctor, Dr. Joseph Wu, who was a neuropsychiatry and brain damage specialist, testified during trial that Margaret had at least 10 brain injuries, with most of them being on the right side of her brain, which resulted in asymmetrical changes and changes in her frontal lobe. Damage to the frontal lobe specifically affects impulse control, judgment, and mood regulation. In another quote from a court document, Margaret's brain injuries would make it hard for her to conform her conduct to the requirements of society. He testified that she would have an overreaction to slight provocation, but that Margaret's injuries should not impair her planning abilities. Margaret's ability to understand and regulate proportionate responses in a consistent manner was significantly impaired. It would be difficult for her consistently to conform her conduct to the requirements of society. Aside from medical experts, some of Margaret's family members testified on her behalf as well. Margaret's Aunt Myrtle testified that life for Margaret was nothing but violence and drug-infested communities. From being assaulted by people she knew to men she was in relationships with, there was a constant cycle of bad situations she was in. Margaret's cousin Tara and sister-in-law April testified that they believed Margaret was a good friend and overall good person. She did sell drugs to provide for her children, but it did not make her a bad person. The only person related to Margaret that said her childhood was good was Margaret's grandmother, Irene Posey. Irene said that at times Margaret would come live with her. Despite what her grandmother said, Margaret testified and confirmed what others had said about her harsh upbringing and things she had to do to survive. She asserted that she did not kill Wenda, and even though her own daughter testified that she witnessed her mother Margaret kill Wenda, Margaret continued to deny the accusations and charges. At the conclusion of trial, Quentin Allen was sentenced to 15 years in prison with 5 years of probation for his guilty plea of second-degree murder. James Martin was charged with 60 months in prison for his involvement in hiding Wenda's body, and as for Margaret, with a unanimous decision, she was sentenced to death on May 19, 2011. Margaret Allen is currently on death row in Florida at the Lowell Annex Maximum Security Facility.
I'm angry about it, yes, but I forgive you.
Thank you all for watching another episode of Death Row Executions, and if you missed it, please check out my last video and also my website, deathrowexecutions.net. At a very early age, he began drinking and using steroids to bulk up. He experimented with other drugs, and when he turned 24, he started using meth.